Hi everybody, I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot, and welcome to the third episode in a series about adding a new industry, Cambridge Iron and Metal, to my Monument City Terminal Division layout. This is the second part about scratch building the main building for Cambridge Iron and Metal, because we had some technical issues. So if you haven't watched the first part, I'd suggest you go do that. Go ahead, I'll wait. I'm not going to wait, let's go. So in the first part, I was just about to get to the good stuff when I realized that all my videos for the second half were filmed in time-lapse mode. So this episode will be a little different as I try to salvage the footage while still giving you all the information I wanted to pass along. This model railroading video is pretty typical of what I do on my channel, including planning, hints, tips, how-tos, and layout updates. So to stay up to date, click on the subscribe button. Clicking on the bell will make sure that you get notified when there is new content available. Also, you may have noticed the shirts I've been wearing in the last couple of videos. You can now purchase these, so if you'd like to support the channel, visit my spring store. I'll include a link in the description below. We do have a lot of mileage to cover in this video, so let's get rolling. When we left off, I had just scored out most of the space for the last loading door, removing the bulk of the material so that I could use the nibbler tool to remove the rest. Is it me, or does the nibbler sound like a villain from a third-rate superhero comic? Anyway, I removed the rest of the material, leaving a small amount near the opening edge. This border's uneven, and to get it down to size, I use a file, or in this case an emery board, to get it close. Test fitting after each few swipes so that I don't take too much material off. Here's what the wall section looked like when I was finished. You can see here that I've press fit one door in, and in the other door opening you can see the piece I cut out of the middle with the knife before finishing up with the nibbler. There was still one window frame where I accidentally removed too much material. However, since the viewing angle would be nearly straight on, I can fix it by building a frame around that one side of the window, and once painted you would barely notice it, as we'll see later. One other window frame was showing some light through the top as well, so I did the same process on that one. Since there are really only two load-bearing walls on this structure, and both of those walls are made from two brick wall sections, I wanted to make sure that they were as sturdy and rigid as possible, especially near the joints on each side wall. On the back of each brick sheet there's a lip on the bottom and on one side. They're recessed on the front side of the brick sheet so that you can use them to line them up, and they're raised on the back side. I took advantage of that for my bracing. It turned out that 40,000 styrene was the perfect thickness to create a flush surface. I had some scrap pieces of 40,000 styrene left over from another project, so I cut it roughly into strips and placed them along the backs of the walls. I put two pieces close to the sides of each joint and then spaced the rest out across the sheet, being careful not to get too close to the corners where I'd be attaching each perpendicular wall together. I used plastic solvent cement to join the pieces. For those who don't know, solvent cement is not actually a glue. It dissolves the plastic surfaces that it touches, and as the solvent evaporates, the plastic hardens again. By then, in theory, the plastic from each side has had time to meld together, making a strong joint. You do have to be careful though, as it does melt the plastic, and this can cause damage. I used two Lego building blocks to strengthen the lateral joint. I like Lego blocks for this purpose as well as for corner bracing because they're perfectly square and the plastic they're made from works really well with the solvent cement. To brace the length of the wall, I used a long strip of 188,000 square styrene. I repeated the process with the second wall and then gave the plastic solvent time to set up again, applying some weight to ensure good contact. For the foundation of this building, I used pieces left over from some Pike Stuff kits. These kits come with pieces to be used for foundations, but I usually find them to be too tall. They just don't look right to me on a Pike Stuff building, so if I use a foundation, it's usually made of smaller styrene strip. But for this building, especially since it was going to be sunk in the ground, more on that later, I thought it would work well. I did some initial measurements. The foundation pieces come in two sizes, and I wanted to use the longer pieces at the corners and the end of each wall. Then I could use the shorter pieces to fill the gaps and cut those down to size if I needed to. The pieces come with one end beveled to 45 degrees, so to give a nice square corner I glued these pieces together before I measured anything. I used another Lego piece to provide support and really be sure it was square because I'd be using the foundation to square the walls as well. I started with the side wall, the one with two delivery doors. I put the corner piece in place, then started to... I forgot to cut out the opening for the personnel door that's supposed to go between the two large delivery doors. Luckily, I wanted it offset and closer to one door, not centered between them, so I didn't have to mess with the styrene brace. But back to the nibbler. With the personnel door opening now cut in, I put the corner piece in place, then the long piece, and then put the other pieces in place to determine what I would need to cut. Even though the long piece would be at the end when assembled, doing it this way gave me an easy way to find the right length without having to worry about measuring with a ruler. And when I came back to test it, it was a perfect fit. I then repeated the process with the front wall, and as it turned out, the pieces I had were just the right length, give or take 1/16 of an inch, so I left it as is. I then numbered the foundation pieces so that I could easily get them back in the right order after painting. With the visible sides of the building in good shape, it was time to move on to the two walls that weren't really walls. This is because the train needed to round the corner and would actually be traveling underneath the roof. I talked about that in part 1. I started with the support structure. I decided to use 1/4 inch by 3/8 inch styrene for the beams. This might be overkill, but I knew that this had to bear the weight of the roof and that both spans would be relatively long, so I wanted to avoid sagging. I also wanted to make sure that the connection was going to be as strong as possible, so instead of simply gluing the pieces together, I took a play out of the woodworking playbook and notched each one of the pieces so that they would stack on top of one another. My cuts weren't perfectly square, so when I cemented the beams together, I added some shims in the gaps to make it as solid and even as possible. Once that's set, I double-checked the size and spacing on the layout. So far, so good. I used another Lego block to brace the corner. I also added another block, the black one shown in the photo, which I would attach the corner leg to. As it worked out, the measurement to the bottom of the 1/4 inch by 3/8 inch beam would allow me to align the Lego blocks right to the bottom of that beam, and then use 7 Lego bricks stacked as a leg, and it would fit perfectly. I also added a couple of other legs so that I could have some more places to bear weight and not rely solely on the joints at the brick walls. This turned out to be a benefit for another reason. When I tested the auto rack going around the corner, the sides just slightly scraped on the Lego. Because it was Lego, I was able to make adjustments immediately and easily, so I offset it and away we went. I then moved on to what would be visible. My plan was to use angle stock, laminate brick sheet to it, and then place that on top of the beams I just built. At one point I considered using only the angle stock, but again, I was worried about sagging since they'd be bearing the weight of the roof, and it really is a long stretch. It also would have made for a much less rugged structure for when it needs to be moved. I used some 1/4 inch angle styrene stock and I cut some thin strips of brick sheet. I use sheet from the N-Scale Architect. Despite their name, they do make products for HO scale, and I'm really a fan of their brick sheets, which come in a bunch of different styles. Although the size of the brick on the sheet wasn't a match for what was on the Walther brick sheets, it was close, and I figured it would be far enough back on the layout that it wouldn't matter, especially after weathering. I painted the brick sheets the same color that I'd painted the walls. In this case, Ace Premium Matte Terracotta. The angle stock comes in pieces that are 14 inches long. I have walls that are 13 inches and 16 inches, so I knew that I'd have to cut one leg down, but then I could use the remaining piece on the other longer wall. This would provide the best support for the laminated brick piece, since the far corner was going to be hanging in space a little bit, just because of the way the angle stock meets at the corner. I glued the angle stock to the beam using CA. I then laminated the painted brick sheet to the angle stock, also using CA. I applied the CA with a toothpick to provide as much control as possible. I used a weight to provide as many contact points as I could. Although, in a couple of places I did still need to apply some more CA. I now wanted to attach the two visible walls in preparation for attaching the foundation. While I was here, I added the supports that would hold up the roof, using a straight edge to make sure they were in line. After that, it was time to glue the two walls at the corner. I mentioned earlier I'm a big believer in using Lego blocks, and they would come into play here again. I think Lego is a great, relatively inexpensive method for bracing. You can go to yard sales and online sites like eBay and find people selling old general sets relatively cheap. Maybe their kids grew out of it or something, I don't know, but I can't for the life of me imagine ever growing out of Lego. I love Lego. You crazy people, whatever. To be clear, I'm not talking about buying from the dealers who specialize in Lego. They're geared to the collector and their prices reflect that. I'm talking about a set with a bunch of multicolored blocks of various sizes like this one. You can also buy pieces directly from the Lego site, and again, while relatively pricey, you can get exactly the pieces that you want in the colors that you want. You can find specialty pieces like these, which I find very useful for bracing and so on. I bought a bunch in black and white. We'll use this tall 1x1x5 piece to brace our corners. I also added a 1x1x1 piece upside down up near the roof line so that the roof could sit on that corner. When it came to the brick sheet, I made sure that the right face was showing in the corner, which would hide the cut I made to get the wall piece down to size. This would also ensure that it sat correctly in the foundation. After letting the corner set, I went back to the foundation. In the interim, I'd painted the pieces my favorite rattle can concrete color, Rust-Oleum Khaki, from their camouflage line. I'd attached the corner pieces together before painting, and now, using the numbers I'd added before, put the pieces into place and cemented them in place as well. Because the one wall was sticking straight up in the air, I used a small clamp to make sure it aligned with the foundation and that everything stayed in place. I repeated the process for both walls. I then cemented the back piece to the front walls, using some more Lego pieces for bracing. I tested the fit of the roof, which did need some minor trimming before painting it a grimy black color. Finally, I installed the windows and doors. I'd previously painted them a dark gray color to closely resemble prototype photos. I attached them using solvent cement, this time using a solvent applicator tool rather than relying on the brush. The brush is great for large areas where you don't have to worry about damage, which is why you saw me using it before on the backs of the walls. Even then, there were a couple of places I should have been a little more careful, but again, weathering will be our friend here. For the doors and windows though, where you want the glue to go in a very specific line, the applicator is much more precise. Because I didn't want light to shine through the windows or for people to be able to see into the building, which would ruin the illusion I was going for in hiding the corner to begin with, I decided to make the windows black. Using an old transparency, for those of us old enough to remember overhead projectors and transparencies, I painted one side grimy black, giving it a couple of coats. This allowed the shiny side to remain, keeping the illusion of glass while making sure that not much light got through. I then trimmed them down to the appropriate size for the windows and doors, and glued it to the inside of the structure using Eileen's tacky glue. As you can see, it does a good job of providing a window shine while blocking the view. I did have to do some additional trimming for one window that fell right on a wall seam, but overall it was an easy process. The last thing I did was add the frame around the main door, both to cover the hole there as well as to give a more prototypical appearance. It was now time to add the roof and put the building in place on the layout. One of the things that I discovered as I was going through was that I made a mistake by putting the cork all the way to the edge of the track where the building was going to be. You can see here in these early shots the dark brown of the cork that I had laid and painted. You can see here in the later shots that I have removed that cork, and the reason for that was I wanted to give the impression that the foundation of the building, once it was finished, was sunk into the ground and not sitting on top of the cork. So in order to do that, I removed the cork so that the foundation would be below the level of the cork where it had been removed. So yet another instance of me doing something and then realizing afterwards that I shouldn't have done it that way. Here's the building in place. It's an eye-catching structure designed to draw your eye away from the unrealistic corner while providing the desired amount of mass. I think it does its job really well, and I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. You can see in this shot a couple of details as well as the quote-unquote painted sign on the side of the building. We'll cover those in the next episode. Note that unless you know what you're looking for, you don't tend to notice the areas on the sides of the windows where the openings were too big and I framed them out and painted them. And with that, Cambridge Iron and Metal is now on its way to be a real destination on the layout, as well as being a scenic attention getter. That's all for this episode. In the next installment, we'll cover details and weathering for this building. Right now, it is way too clean, so we need to dirty it up so that it fits into its setting. I love getting your comments, so if you have thoughts, suggestions, or questions, please include them below. If you enjoyed this video and think others would enjoy it as well, click the thumbs up to like it and tell your friends. All this helps me know I'm giving you what you want while helping my YouTube analytics. If you want to see more right now, click on the links over here. I'm Joe Parker of the Pixel Depot. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll meet me next time in the train room.